So, looking at the stats, seems like you people do want more talk about the books videos. Fine, assholes. At least the video will look better this time. This is the bar I hang out with while writing or editing. I leave my phone at home, so I have no distractions. When writing, I just have a pad of paper and pencils, plus whatever reference books I bring. And when I'm editing, it's printed out and I'm using a red pen. No electronics except maybe my Discman. I didn't bring that today. Problem with doing it that way though is the cost. Because if I come here and hang out for a while, I gotta order something. You know, glass of soda here costs €4. And that's not the worst price around. The day I finished up the freebie hardcover book, which is still available by the way, I had hard deadlines because the book had to be out early enough in December to run the sale for a decent amount of time before the end of the year. So I was here that last day for 12 hours. Spent like €60 on baskets of chicken wings and soda over that time. Had a few meals, and that's insane when you got money problems, yeah? But, you know, oh, I gotta check my email. Oh, I'm stressed. Let me just read this book for a while. Oh, let me, you know, all the distractions you have at home, it can be too great, especially when you're stressed. So I gotta get the hell out of the house to do some actual work sometimes. Anyway, this thing, J. Stewart Pate's No Rest for the Wicked. It's an adventure, but it's not a weird fantasy adventure. In fact, there's not a single supernatural element to be found in the entire thing. Nevertheless, I believe that this is a cornerstone and defining adventure for Lamentations of the Flame Princess, and its presence in the catalog helps solidify LOTFP as weird fantasy by Gestalt. Let me tell you a little bit about the 30 Years' War, the defining European conflict of the early modern period that LOTFP uses as a default setting. They're all assumed setting and not everything. Anyway, for more detail on the 30 Years' War, in more detail than you'd ever want to know, I recommend Europe's Tragedy, a new history of the 30 Years' War by Peter H. Wilson. It came out in 2009. I don't know if there's a better reference that come out since. It's as old as LOTFP. But this book is so in-depth that the text is 850 pages, and then there's another 70 pages of footnotes, plus an index. And the war doesn't even start until page 269. You read this book, you'll know, what happened, who was involved, and much more importantly, the history of why it happened. The 30 Years' War was the most destructive war in the history of Europe. It lasted 3 times longer than World Wars I and II combined. It's right there in the name. And it killed a greater percentage of the population of the Holy Roman Empire, very roughly Germany, than the casualty rates of the 2 world wars in Europe combined. Areas of the empire was depopulated by 30 to 60%. These numbers are just completely fucked. It was an apocalyptic conflict, and in all of history since, in all the world, we've only been able to match those levels of devastation through use of atomic bombs. It's one of the reasons I decided to place LOTFP in this time period. It was this or the first wave of the Black Death, but the plague is still very much active in the 17th century as well, so against this backdrop of the 30 Years' War, which the adventure spends 2 pages informing us about, a soldier is deserting his army and bringing his family along. He's hiding out at the moment at an inn outside the area of immediate conflict, being sheltered by the innkeeper and his family. 2 days later is when the player characters come on in because, well, they need to stay in an inn. And then later that same day that the player characters arrive, Imperial intelligence officers are on the scene searching for the deserter. and don't think for a second that any of these people, scarred forever by this war, have any mercy left in them. So, the player characters now have a choice. Here's the situation. What do they do? And that's it. That's the whole adventure. That one situation. No wizards, no magic doodads, no monsters, no eldritch power, just being caught up in a horror bigger than any of them, and being cursed to have the power and the opportunity to influence the outcome at this particular place, at this particular time. And the adventure does not assume what the players will do or what they should do. The adventure doesn't care. It passes no judgment. Do the players help the family flee? Do they attack the soldiers? Do they turn the family over? Hell, do they just rob the inn? Do they decide they don't need the headache and all of this is none of their business, so they don't do anything? Well, it's all accounted for in the adventure. And no matter what choice is made, there will be consequences, and they will not be pleasant. This adventure, I'll note, has no explicit content. Not in the art, not in the text. Violence against people is not portrayed nor described in any detail. The worst the text gets is this passage. Quote, "The adults are executed and the children are placed with families until they can be dropped at an orphanage." Yet I have no problem stating that this is absolutely the most grim thing that Lamentations of the Flame Princess has ever released, and I think it would rank favorably in that regard against anything anyone has ever released for gaming, tabletop or electronic. A good part of communicating that to the referee is Jez Gordon's art of the book, in the book. And I should have brought another copy with me to leave that up, but I mean, sorry, I mean, look at this shit. Slick and smooth. That's me doing these reviews. Yeah. Yeah, look at that shit. I miss that kind of art. I mean, shit, that is great. I mean, that and the Deathfrost Doom art he did in particular, just my God. And I'm making a point to say that No Rest for the Wicked is not graphic, just like the last video I made it a point to say that World of the Lost is not graphic. But I think talking a little bit about why a number of LOTFP publications are indeed graphic, and why it should be just as normal to say not explicit or for general audiences, as it is to say that something is explicit or for mature audiences, and why those descriptions should be simply informative and not value-laden, well, maybe a little talk about of that is in order, and it does relate to what No Rest for the Wicked is and how its presentation contributes to its impact. Fact is, the vast majority of role-playing games feature violent conflict. Even the most mainstream and popular RPGs feature a gang of people armed to the fucking teeth, wandering around dealing death. But the violence is, in almost every instance, bowdlerized. Bowdlerized? I should look that up before saying it on camera. It's made palatable. It's made palatable and enjoyable and acceptable for children. RPG producers don't want people to think about, and RPG players in general don't want to think about, the fact that every RPG fight would feel like the first 25 minutes of Saving Private Ryan if the games portray the honesty of violence to the players. It seems strange to me that if you're going to have some sort of fictional entertainment that features violence, that you have to give special notice if it will portray actual violence. That's ass backwards. It really is. Violence disturbs people, and it fucking should. There are some people that portray graphic violence for other ends than just, here's violence and it's disturbing, and of course that's great. Paul Verhoeven, early Peter Jackson, just two examples. I could be here all day with that. But people generally don't want to see the results of violence in their violent entertainment. No. They just want to enjoy the violence without thinking any deeper about it. They want to, as default, feel good about the violence they deal in these games, and think of themselves as the good guys for dealing it. They want to completely forget that if they, as real-life people, ever encountered a single one of the very many deadly situations their characters ever encounter over their entire career as players in role-playing games, that would be the worst day of their entire life, and it would be a trauma that they would carry forever. But let's just hand wave that away, you know? I want to feel good about swinging this sword at someone's head. And people call me sick, right? Fuck off. But it's not that Lamentations is morally good for reminding you every now and then what it actually means in-game to use a sword to reduce an enemy to 0 hit points. But we at least don't pretend it's anything other than what it is. We still expect you to enjoy the game, but we hope to remind you that any game where you're frequently fighting for your life is really a horror game, and so enjoy it on that basis. And never mind actual violence, the threat of violence is mentally destabilizing. I mean, I've been lucky in my real life that my exposure to actual violence has been limited and minor. There was some violence, you know, I'm not counting rough housing when I was a kid, but there was some violence in my house when I was a kid, yeah. But I've known a good number of people for whom it was much, much worse. My first girlfriend was violent. She'd throw fists if I said something she didn't like, and she'd do it in private, she'd do it in front of her family, she'd do it in front of my family. I like to say I've never been in a real fight, but my first relationship ended in a goddamn physical fight, and I'm extremely lucky it happened in front of witnesses that saw I was trying to walk away, and she was coming at me from behind, grabbing me by my hair and punching me right in the back. I mean, none of what she ever did was really damaging physically, which is why I don't normally think about it when I think, have I ever been in a fight? But the constant humiliation whenever it happened, the constant being on edge and trying to be vigilant of never antagonizing her because I was never quite sure what was okay and what would set her off, no one should live that way. I mean, no, I didn't put this in the script, but you just think of the look on your mother's face, looking across the table, as the first person that you've ever said I love you to, then the first person to ever say I love you to you, sitting there wailing on you because you dropped a draw 4 on her in a game of Uno with the family. It's funny, though, that I accepted that and stayed in the relationship. But at the party, in front of friends, when everything finally broke down, that was my last straw. The mind is a funny thing. You know, and about the threat of violence, or the perceived threat, whichever it was. You know, I've told the story on channel before about hiring a security guard for Gen Con 2018 because things had gotten so nasty online that I thought violence at the booth was a possibility. And remember, at that Gen Con 2018, there was an incident where someone got attacked at a bar not in the convention hall because of their online argle-bargle, so it's not like I was insane in how I was reading the general atmosphere. But I spent 4 figures on that security guard because I was afraid something could happen. And that, you know. And the next year, 2019, that was the year everything was so much worse. I actually had contingency plans with my ex that I brought along to Gen Con that year about what to do if there was trouble at the booth. She made me go to the organizers and ask and confirm that the insurance that they make us buy as exhibitors there, she made me ask them if that insurance would cover her hospital bills if she was injured in an incident at the booth. She made me do that before she agreed to be at the booth. That's how she was judging the situation. This wasn't just in my head. And that's how I was at every convention that year, watching my back, in the convention hall and on the streets outside, wondering if all the people talking about how I was a problem and needed to go away was going to inspire someone to be more directly insistent. All the while, for the first half of the year at least, before I shut that shit down, a friendly person was frequently in contact with me, letting me know the whole scene, the whole RPG scene, was ready to accept me back and support me if I just did what I was told. That whole situation ended up with me in front of a shrink later in the year, asking about voluntary institutionalization, because I really needed to just leave my life for some period of time. That was denied. Thanks. But thank goodness the next year there was a pandemic to allow me to stay away from the convention circuit for a couple of years. Thank you, Wuhan. But in the meantime, I was prescribed pills, which turned me into a useless zombie, and I was off those, on and off those for a few years, to my great cost. But to bring this back around to No Rest for the Wicked, which, by the way, was released in the middle of all that, even though all the writing and the creative decisions were made before everything went to shit. The entire setup is just the threat of the violence, the paranoia. It's so suffocating. It's so crushing. There's no course of action that leads to a happy ending. And even if the adventure doesn't go into specifics, it is very much understood that if and when violence does break out, it's not going to be the fun and bloodless kind. No. No, it isn't. That's what this adventure is. That's what this adventure does. And it doesn't need to be explicit. It doesn't need to spell anything out like that. In fact, it simply leaves behind all the tools and gimmicks the rest of us use to evoke these emotions. It just leaves them out. Because it doesn't need them. This is just a masterpiece of desperation, anxiety, and hopelessness. And I know. Trust me about that. And in that way, it certainly belongs as a heavy hitter of the Lamentations catalog. And I do want to mention that when I say, when I talk about this adventure that way, or I say that Disastrum, for example, is the best thing LOTFP has ever put out, people will suggest that maybe we shouldn't ever use explicit content, because look what can happen when you don't, and look at the trouble you can get into when you do. And to that I just say nonsense. To me, it's all the same thing. The influences and impulses and preferences that lead me down the path of Curse of the Daughter Brides and Big Puppet and the Book of Antithesis, they're exactly the same as the ones that lead me to Disastrum or Nebulith or No Rest for the Wicked. It's because I'm willing to go there that I'm also willing to come here. Nobody else releases stuff like this, not to my knowledge. So that's what I got to say about that. But one thing, if I'm continuing to do these talking about specific adventure videos that I want to make a continuing feature, is I want to point out there are a couple ways in which the adventure may fall short. First is the cover. Again, I should have brought a second copy. Take a good look at the cover there. I checked before recording. The cover was completed 2 months before the first interior art pieces were done. Cover artist Yannick Bouchard did exactly what I told him to do, so my criticism here is on me, not him. The cover certainly shows a bit of what goes on in the adventure, but it's too clean. The words and the art inside the book work together to convey the utter darkness of both the immediate situation and the larger situation behind that. The cover art doesn't blend with it. It doesn't communicate that very well to anybody seeing it. It's wonderful being the weakest link of a creative project. That's warms my heart when that happens to me. The other potential snag is the player's attitude. If they only care about exploration or exciting adventure or high strangeness, this adventure is not going to give it to them. If there's no chance they're ever going to care about any NPCs, then the whole thing is just a wet fart. It's one thing to say if the players decide to do nothing, there are still serious consequences. But if the players just don't care, if they're playing the game just to deal some death and destruction anyway, and so what's a few dead NPCs? Well, the book will still be nice for you, the referee, to look at and read and just dream for a better group of players someday. But if any of your players, and it's only ever going to take just one, if any of your players like their character to have any moral agency, well, let the trauma begin. So that's No Rest for the Wicked. It's available through both the LOTFP US and EU web stores, and links are in the video description. Although if you do look at the store links, you'll notice that the book is inexpensive. That's the price the book's always been, and here's why the price is so low. First, I want to mention that my pricing scheme for everything is a formula based on cost. I total up all the costs, art, editing, printing, layout, and I divide it all up by the print run to determine the per unit cost of the book I'm publishing. And then I apply the formula to come up with the final price, rounded of course so the catalog isn't a mess of €23.91 and €25.26 looking prices. That would be ungainly. Book printing is extremely sensitive to economies of scale. The more you print at one time, the less each copy is going to cost. So printing 500 copies of a book is going to cost more to print per unit than printing thousands of copies. And the art per copy ends up, being twice as much for 500 copies as 1,000. Simple math. These days, for a book this size, I'm printing 500 to 1,000 copies. But for this one, I did an experiment to see if lower pricing moved more copies, and so I printed 3,000 of them. The per unit printing cost was way down, especially since it's got black and white interiors and no printed end papers. Art costs per unit were also way down because we were printing so much more. And it was printed before the pandemic when everything was significantly cheaper than it is now. And it ended up doing pretty decent. It's done better lifetime than the Punchline, which is probably the best comparison as to when it was published and how big of a book it is, but only just better. And it didn't sell above our usual print run of this sort of adventure in those days. And the higher retail price tag on the Punchline means that one's made more actual money. So even when our retail distribution was pretty damn good, the higher print run for a smaller product wasn't exactly a success. It wasn't an abject failure. The book's been decently profitable, but it would have been more profitable, I think, with a smaller print run and the resulting higher retail price that would have put this in line with other books of its size. So that's the boring part, but because of that experiment, the book is still priced cheap as shit, frankly, so jump on it. Now.